Story 1. Several years prior, my companion TZ and I came to a mutual decision to undertake the quintessential American cross-country expedition. Our itinerary was straightforward. Commence our journey in New York, culminate it in Los Angeles, and dedicate a period of 6 weeks to traversing the nation in a meandering fashion, devoid of any rigid timetable. We were both young adults in our 20s, experiencing financial constraints. To economize, I proposed the concept of lodging in the rear compartment of my hatchback vehicle. My mother had experience as a long-haul truck driver, which led me to believe I possessed some knowledge regarding life on the open road. We acquired an assortment of blankets and sheets from a retail establishment known as Charity Finds, repurposing some to fashion window coverings. After the passage of approximately 1 week, our makeshift living arrangement had been perfected to an art form. We sought slumber in any location that instilled a sense of security, including designated rest stops, complimentary campgrounds, expansive parking lots, and occasionally even a private driveway when an amiable stranger extended such an invitation. In truth, it was a remarkable experience. We encountered an array of exceptionally fascinating individuals. We accepted a ride in the bed of a pickup truck to a diner called Diner's Delight with a group of boisterous campers engaged in celebratory activities with an elderly cowboy who imparted to us the art of line dancing and even commemorated the 4th of July holiday alongside a family who essentially embraced us as their own. A special commendation goes to the grandmother for her cannabis-infused confectionery. Every single interaction we experienced with an unfamiliar person was a positive one. This pattern continued until we reached Arizona. We were in the vicinity of Flagstaff when we discovered a free camping location listed on an online mapping service named Searchwell. It was situated deep within a forested area, quite a distance from the nearest town. Yet it was not an unfamiliar scenario for us. Upon our arrival, only a few automobiles and an aged recreational vehicle were present. As we slowly drove past the recreational vehicle, its entrance quietly creaked open, and a male figure emerged. Tez, ever the genial one, offered him a wave. The man merely fixed his gaze upon her. There was no reciprocal wave, no indication of a smile, absolutely nothing. Just an unexpressive, disquieting countenance. Then, without uttering a single syllable, he deliberately closed the door, maintaining his watchful eye on us throughout the entire action. We initially presumed he was merely a curmudgeonly elderly individual who desired his solitude. Consequently, we positioned our vehicle further into the area, closer to the arboreal growth, and commenced engaging in light-hearted activities, such as capturing absurd photographs and sharing laughter. TZ observed a communal fire further down the path, and in her characteristic manner, she expressed a desire to engage with new acquaintances. Such interactions had defined the entirety of our excursion, connecting with people, sharing beverages, and exchanging personal narratives. There seemed to be no justifiable reason for this particular evening to diverge from that established pattern, or so we thought. At the communal fire, we encountered 2 gentlemen who were the proprietors of the vehicles we had previously observed. The older of the 2 appeared to be profoundly disoriented, revolving in circles and uttering incoherent pronouncements regarding unidentified flying objects, yet he seemed to pose no threat. The younger man introduced himself as a former custodian of parklands. He possessed an amiable disposition, an easygoing nature, and proved to be genuinely engaging in conversation. We spent a considerable duration simply conversing about life, our respective travels, and miscellaneous topics. It was then that he brought up the subject of a bear, asserting that he had sighted one earlier, in very close proximity to the campsite. TZ expressed skepticism, prompting him to retrieve his photographic device and display images to her. The bear was unmistakably depicted in the photographs. Both of us experienced a growing sense of unease due to the fact that one of us invariably had to relieve themselves in the dead of night. The notion of inadvertently encountering a bear in the darkness was far from ideal. But then, the ranger emitted a peculiar, subdued laugh, and his entire demeanor underwent a transformation. He directed his gaze squarely at us and articulated, "Should you exit your vehicle in the middle of the night, it is not a bear that should be the primary subject of your concern." I instinctively awaited the punchline, the moment where he would smirk, playfully nudge Tez, and confess he was merely jesting with us. That moment never arrived. I managed to force out a weak chuckle and uttered a jocular remark about serial perpetrators lurking in the forest. TZ participated in the charade, interjecting a reference to a well-known horror film series. But despite our repeated attempts to divert the conversation, he consistently reverted to the original topic. He persisted in discussing instances of individuals vanishing in wooded areas and unsettling occurrences of entities seizing people from within their automobiles. His discourse did not feel like a mere recounting of frightening tales. It felt as though he was attempting to issue a warning to us. The elder gentleman was too profoundly disconnected from reality to take notice, simply gazing upwards at the celestial expanse. However, TZ and I experienced an escalating level of discomfort with each passing second. Then, the ranger rose from his position, moved towards his cooler, situated beyond the perimeter of the campfire's illumination, and at that precise moment, I perceived it, a minuscule crimson point of light in the surrounding obscurity. It took me a brief moment to comprehend its nature. It was a camera. He was capturing images of us, not with us in a collaborative sense, not, "Hello, let us capture a self-portrait together." He was simply and silently taking photographs of us as though we were some form of exhibition. He inspected the display screen, made an adjustment, and captured another image, this time utilizing the flash mechanism. TZ and I remained seated, rigid as planks of wood, staring intently at him. He offered no explanation, nor did he seek permission. He simply returned, resumed his seated position, and continued as if absolutely nothing out of the ordinary had occurred. That was our definitive breaking point. We devised a pretense about needing to arrange our vehicle for the evening and promptly departed from that location. As we stood to leave, the individual obsessed with unidentified flying objects smiled and bid us a pleasant night. The ranger, however, merely bestowed upon us a cold, vacant stare and articulated, "Exercise caution out there. There is more than just bears in the woods. Every single nerve in my physiological system immediately became highly alert. Tess forced out a laugh and forcefully pulled me towards the automobile. The very instant we were inside, she secured the doors, her respiration visibly rapid and shallow. Why was he capturing images of us? I was trembling. I possessed no idea what words to utter. Consequently, the first utterance that escaped my lips was, "I have read that perpetrators of serial crimes sometimes issue warnings to their intended victims." She stared fixedly at me, then relocked the doors, as if that action would somehow offer further protection. Do you entertain the thought that he simply captured photographs of us as potential victims? That was the culmination of our anxiety. We succumbed to panic. She activated the vehicle's headlamps, and I promptly deactivated them. For an inexplicable reason, this particular night was the only occasion we had neglected to fully prepare our camp. There was nothing to gather, nothing to dismantle. We engaged the car's transmission into drive and accelerated to maximum speed. As we transitioned onto the unpaved road, I caught one final glimpse of the Ranger in the rearview mirror. He was advancing towards our automobile, and his expression was no longer one of amusement. Story 2. A short while ago, my spouse and I were undertaking a motoring excursion into the elevated terrain. It was one of those protracted travel periods during which the hours commenced to coalesce into an indistinct continuum. By the time we approached our designated accommodation, our resources, both vehicular and personal, were nearing depletion. We made the decision to procure sustenance before embarking on the concluding segment of our journey, and located an eating establishment in a diminutive settlement situated off the primary thoroughfare. Or at least, that was our initial perception of it being a small town. It transpired that it functioned more as a bustling transportation hub rather than a tranquil roadside eatery. However, at that juncture, our hunger was too profound to be concerned. Exiting the main highway nonetheless proved to be an absolute torment. The configuration of the traffic flow defied all logical comprehension. Envision a standard highway off-ramp, but then append additional signal lights, perplexing merge lanes, and arbitrary turns that appeared to lead nowhere discernible. I was already fatigued from operating the vehicle throughout the day, and attempting to decipher this convoluted arrangement was certainly not alleviating my condition. Somewhere amidst the disarray, I inadvertently caused another motorist to alter their course. I discerned a prolonged, indignant blare from behind us. My wife, ever keen in her observations, informed me, "Indeed, you unequivocally just impeded that individual's progress." I felt a pang of remorse. Assuredly, it was an unintentional error, but evidently the other driver was not inclined to dismiss the incident. As we proceeded up the incline toward the dining establishment, I observed a substantial pickup truck entering the roadway behind us, and something about the manner in which it maneuvered evoked a sensation of dread within me. I am unable to adequately describe it, but I instinctively knew he was following us. Striving to refrain from premature conclusions, I guided our vehicle into the restaurant's designated parking area and slowly advanced toward the rear section, simply to ascertain if he would replicate our actions. Predictably, he also turned into the lot. However, it appeared he lost sight of our vehicle amidst the congested parking spaces. I mumbled, "He is trailing us," and my wife, without the slightest hesitation, responded, "Yes, that is uncomfortable. Let us seek an alternative location." That brief exchange was all the affirmation I required. We circumambulated the rear perimeter of the edifice, deliberately affording him an opportunity to park or simply proceed. Then, as I redirected our course toward the exit, my abdominal muscles tightened. He was positioned at the entrance, not parked, not maneuvering into a spot, merely stationary there, observing the entire lot. Then, abruptly, his truck lurched forward, accelerating directly toward us. I scarcely had sufficient time to react before he angled his truck across our lane, effectively cutting off our escape. He was deliberately obstructing our path. As he performed this maneuver, his window descended, and a rough-appearing individual, older, adorned with tattoos, clad in a tattered sleeveless garment, leaned out, extending his arm toward my automobile, as if preparing to seize it. And then he shrieked at me, "Halt your vehicle!" Indeed, that was not an action I intended to perform. Everything within me was vociferating, "Do not cease movement." So I vociferated, negative, aggressively turned the steering wheel, and accelerated, narrowly squeezing past him with scarcely an inch to spare. I had harbored the hope that this would signify the conclusion of the ordeal. It did not. I rapidly descended the incline toward the main thoroughfare, but a red signal light and an excessive number of vehicles precluded a swift evasion. Thinking with urgency, I swerved into a fueling station at the base of the hill. And, would you believe it, he pursued me there as well. That was the absolute limit. I was no longer engaging in this perilous pursuit. I abruptly pivoted the automobile and ascended the hill once more, simultaneously initiating a call to the emergency services hotline. The operator maintained a composed and reassuring demeanor as I elucidated that an individual exhibiting extreme aggression due to traffic irritation was following us and attempting to impede our progress. I informed her of my readiness to drive directly to the closest police precinct. But just as I was furnishing her with specific information, I observed something noteworthy. He had vanished. I remained connected to the emergency line for a slightly extended period, merely to confirm his absence, then selected an alternative route out of the town. My wife and I were completely discomposed. There was no possibility of us stopping for a meal at that point. We simply drove directly to the hotel, continuously scrutinizing our side and rear view mirrors throughout the entire journey. And the most peculiar aspect of the entire situation was that, even after we believed we had eluded him, we still perceived his pickup truck on the roadway ahead of us later that same evening. We reversed our course, selected another path, and abstained from stopping for any reason whatsoever. And I could not dislodge the pervasive sensation that we had narrowly avoided something considerably more dire than merely an irate driver. Story 3. In my initial year of university attendance, I conceived of a brilliant concept and promptly executed it. The idea was to journey southward to Mexico, with my housemate Ryan and our respective romantic partners, to experience authentic Mexican cuisine and embark on a minor adventure. This transpired around the year 2005, and while metropolitan areas such as Bordertown possessed a less than stellar reputation, we had been informed that Frontier Crossing was entirely safe to visit. So, naturally, we reasoned, why not proceed? The quartet of us packed ourselves into my vehicle and undertook the 3-hour drive from Gulf Coast City late on a Sunday evening. In retrospect, that was likely our preliminary miscalculation. We presented as two impeccably groomed college students, accompanied by fair-haired, cerulean-eyed female companions, which, upon reflection, caused us to stand out conspicuously. Upon reaching the international boundary, a designated parking area existed where one could leave their automobile and simply traverse the border on foot. No passport was required, merely a driver's license. It appeared sufficiently uncomplicated. But as we presented our identification documents to the border agent, he cast upon us a particular kind of glance. You know, the sort of look a parental figure bestows when they are cognizant that you are on the verge of making a profoundly imprudent decision, yet they elect to permit you to acquire wisdom through difficult experience. He emitted a sigh and inquired about our intentions. We informed him that our sole desires were to partake in food, beverages, and explore the vicinity. He paused, nodded slowly, and articulated, "Please, exercise extreme caution." I experienced an unfamiliar pang of disquiet, but I dismissed it. It's Mexico, I inwardly reassured myself. We will be fine. The moment we stepped off the bridge and into Frontier Crossing, however, it was akin to entering an entirely disparate realm. The thoroughfares were dimly illuminated, some not even paved, with individuals lingering in the shadowy recesses or vending assorted merchandise on the pedestrian walkways. We had not advanced more than 100 yards before an unknown male fixated his attention upon us. This individual, likely in his late 30s, possessing a sturdy muscular physique, spoke with a pronounced Spanish intonation, yet he could communicate in rudimentary English, and he was excessively amiable, the sort of friendliness that instantaneously arouses suspicion. He initiated conversation with us as though we were his long-lost, closest companions, adamantly asserting his knowledge of the finest drinking establishments, the most excellent dining venues, and the best of everything. Immediately, I felt an aversion towards him. There was an intangible sense of something amiss, yet the others did not appear to share my level of apprehension. Consequently, I endeavored to disregard the feeling. He accompanied us to a restaurant, continuing to engage us in incessant conversation, and even seated himself with us as if we had formally extended an invitation. The individual monopolized the discourse throughout the entire meal, increasingly pressuring us to permit him to serve as our guide around the town. By the time we settled the bill, even Ryan and the female companions were experiencing a sense of discomfort. Then, just as he departed for the washroom, the waitstaff approached our table. She leaned in, directed a serious gaze upon us, and whispered in broken English, "That man, no good man. Muy malo, no good." Instantaneous shivers ran down my spine. We required no further persuasion. We hastily collected our belongings and hurried toward the exit, harboring the hope of slipping away before his return. But precisely as we stepped outside, boom, he was directly there, awaiting our emergence. His entire demeanor had undergone a profound alteration. No more feigned cordial chatter. He appeared visibly enraged. He curtly instructed us to follow him to the premier drinking establishment in town. We hesitated, but fear can compel one to perform irrational actions, and somehow we discovered ourselves trailing behind him down the principal street. Every few minutes, he would abruptly dart across the thoroughfare and murmur something to a contingent of individuals presenting as law enforcement officers positioned on the corner. However, they did not resemble authentic police personnel. They were clad in loose-fitting attire, possessed pistols discreetly tucked into their waistbands, and stood idly, smoking cigarettes, observing us. The entire street seemed to have slowed its pace. People halted and stared as we passed by, as if they were privy to some undisclosed information. And then, the individual performed an action that completely propelled me beyond my limits of composure. He extracted a cigarette, placed it within his oral cavity, and commenced to simulate smoking it. He never ignited it, simply continued to puff away, as if it were an entirely normal behavior. That was the decisive moment. We needed to evacuate the premises immediately. I was mentally monitoring the distance we had traversed from the border, and the bridge lights were progressively diminishing in size. Then we turned onto a peripheral street, and at its terminus, I observed a utility van parked in isolation in an unoccupied lot. The individual gestured towards it and stated that the bar was merely a short distance further. No, absolutely not. I ceased my forward movement and articulated, "No, we are finished. We are returning." The others gazed at me, and I could discern the trepidation etched upon their countenances. I turned and commenced walking, and the very instant we did so, the individual's entire disposition became considerably darker. He began to vociferate after us, demanding that we comply with his instruction to follow him. We disregarded him and accelerated our pace. He persisted in yelling. Then we were running. We sprinted relentlessly all the way back to the border, and just prior to reaching the bridge, he finally desisted from pursuing us. He simply disappeared into the darkened streets as if he understood he had forfeited his opportunity. Once we were in close proximity to the border agents, we refrained from looking back. That night, as we drove homeward, we continued to emit nervous laughter, endeavoring to dissipate the adrenaline. But we all unequivocally knew we had just narrowly avoided something profoundly detrimental. Story 4. In the summer of 2006, I had obtained my driving permit earlier that year, and I must inform you, I was diligently compensating for lost time. At every available opportunity, I was entering my automobile and undertaking solitary road journeys to visit companions situated throughout New England and the mid-Atlantic regions. Being 20 years of age, yet possessing an appearance more akin to a high school student, presented its disadvantages. However, I did not extensively contemplate this at the time. That July, I was en route to the southern part of Pennsylvania to spend an extended weekend at the residence of a friend while her parents were absent from town. We harbored ambitious plans utilizing a hot tub, consuming alcoholic beverages, viewing a nature documentary series while intoxicated, as it had recently. The drive was smooth, the meteorological conditions were splendid, and my chosen musical compilation was perfectly resonant. As soon as I transitioned from the state of New Jersey into Pennsylvania, I resolved to make a stop at one of the initial roadside service areas for vehicle fuel and provisions. I cannot precisely recall its specific designation, but it featured a fueling station accompanied by a substantial convenience retail outlet. Directly opposite it was the highway entrance ramp, and running parallel to that was an unkempt, unpaved road. At the time, I did not give it a second thought. As I was proceeding indoors to acquire some snacks, a male individual approached me. He appeared to be in his late 30s or early 40s, possessing a stocky build and a slightly elevated stature, dressed in a plain black t-shirt and denim trousers, with dark brown hair and a pointed beard. His vehicle, a black pickup truck, was situated just a few spaces away from mine. Something about his presence immediately felt discordant. His gaze was excessively intense, as if he were critically assessing me, and he positioned himself uncomfortably close for personal space. I do not typically detect negative energy from individuals, but this man instantly placed me on edge. Then he commenced speaking. Firstly, he inquired if I originated from the local vicinity, which was illogical, given that my automobile bore Connecticut license plates. Subsequently, he wished to ascertain my destination, and rather strangely, if I was aware of any enjoyable activities to engage in, because he had spare time before some later engagements. Before I could even fully comprehend the sheer peculiarity of his questions, he straightforwardly invited me to participate in a miniature golf game or attend a cinematic screening with him. Who engages in such behavior? I simply shook my head, mumbled something about unfamiliarity with the area, and swiftly walked towards the retail establishment. And that was when the situation escalated in eeriness. As I turned to depart, he abruptly shouted, "You are magnificent!" The volume was sufficient to startle an entire family in the process of exiting the store. His vocal tone was aggressive, excessively forceful, and it sent an abhorrent shiver through me. I did not look back. I merely continued walking and sought refuge within the store. A few minutes later, I observed him enter the premises, but he was not engaged in shopping. He was simply observing me. That was sufficient for me. His pickup truck was nowhere to be seen, leading me to conclude that I was safe. I took my time selecting snacks because, let us be realistic, road trips necessitate sour bright crawlers and trail mix. Then I proceeded outside to replenish my vehicle's fuel tank. That sense of relief was fleeting. As I maneuvered my vehicle onto the road leading back to the highway, I abruptly heard honking. Persistent, loud, as if someone vehemently desired my attention. I looked over, and there he was, seated in his truck on that unpaved road running parallel to the highway ramp, signaling me to stop and shouting. My stomach constricted into a knot. He had been awaiting my return, observing. That was it. I hastily entered the highway. Within moments, I observed his pickup truck entering the roadway behind me. My hands were trembling as I initiated a call to my friend, barely capable of articulating the words. She remained on the telephone, endeavoring to maintain my composure while I accelerated down the I-78 thoroughfare, exerting every effort to establish distance between us. I am uncertain for how long he pursued me, but after several exits, his truck finally vanished from sight. My friend and I had already formulated a contingency plan. If I were to perceive him again, I would not proceed directly to her residence. Instead, I would head to the nearest law enforcement station. Fortunately, I never again sighted his truck. But for the remainder of that journey, I remained tense, incessantly checking my mirrors, my heart vigorously pounding each time I observed another black pickup truck. I arrived at my friend's house safely, and we enjoyed a wonderful weekend. But the entire experience left me profoundly shaken. Over the subsequent years, I did not extensively reflect upon it. It was merely one of those unsettling encounters that one categorizes within their memory. Then, in 2014, I casually recounted the narrative to a friend who possesses a keen interest in factual criminal cases. She became curious and commenced researching serial murderers who were active in Pennsylvania around that period. The first individual whose name appeared was Adam Leroy Lane, and when we retrieved an image of him, my cardiac organ nearly ceased its function. He bore a striking resemblance to the man I had encountered at that fueling station. The same general physique, the same hair, the same facial hair. The sole distinction was that, in my recollection, the individual appeared slightly more slender. Now, I will never possess absolute certainty if it was indeed him, but the temporal and geographical parameters corresponded eerily well. Lane was found guilty of perpetrating the murders of multiple women, and he was known for targeting strangers at random. If that truly was him, I might have experienced one of the narrowest escapes of my life. Story 5. A couple of summers prior, I undertook a day excursion with my son to commemorate his natal anniversary. We visited an aquatic amusement park, had an exceptionally enjoyable time, and after becoming somewhat disoriented due to CardoNav's less than stellar navigational proficiencies, we eventually stopped in a small town for our evening meal. The locality was tiny, comprising barely more than a few streets, but the dinner was palatable, and just as we were preparing to depart, we observed a county fair situated directly across the thoroughfare. It appeared entertaining, so we reasoned, why not? The fair was gradually concluding its operations for the night, but a tractor-pulling competition was on the verge of commencing, and since none of us had ever witnessed such an event, we presumed it would serve as an enjoyable culmination to the day. It was precisely the kind of environment one would anticipate. Families, local residents, and a handful of intoxicated individuals behaving boisterously, yet nothing that evoked a sense of danger. I harbored no concern whatsoever. My 16-year-old son was accompanying me, along with a good friend who possessed a robust physique. Consequently, if anything peculiar were to transpire, I was confident in our ability to manage the situation. But after a period, we determined to depart before the roadways became congested with impaired drivers, returned to the restaurant where we had parked, which was by then closed for the night, entered my vehicle, and set off for home. That is when events began to unfold in a peculiar manner. The very instant we exited the parking lot, I noticed another automobile positioned behind us. Nothing initially seemed out of the ordinary. It was a small town. Perhaps they were proceeding in the same direction. But as we navigated onto this dark, sinuous secondary road leading to the interstate, I realized we were the only two vehicles present. That is when I commenced paying closer attention. The road was completely deserted. Just trees and undulating terrain on either side. No residential structures, no street lighting, just us. And this automobile that seemed to be maintaining an excessively close proximity, I attempted to dismiss it. Perhaps they were from outside the town, like us, merely utilizing the same shortcut to the interstate. Still, I felt uneasy as I drove. I maintained a consistent speed, exercising caution because of the darkness and my desire to avoid a deer unexpectedly appearing in front of us. But then I observed something specific. This individual was not merely following me. He was tailgating me. I reduced my speed, hoping he would simply pass and continue on his way. Instead, he did the opposite. He positioned himself even closer. I could discern that there was only one occupant in the vehicle, and the windows were so heavily tinted that I was unable to distinguish his facial features. My apprehension intensified by a significant margin. I accelerated, thinking perhaps he would retreat if I established some distance between us. Negative. He remained precisely there, precisely matching my velocity. At this juncture, it was unequivocally apparent that this was not some random concurrence. He was deliberately provoking us. I began to experience genuine fear now. My son was situated in the rear seat on his birthday, and now we were being relentlessly pursued down a desolate rural road in an isolated location. I mentally castigated myself for even contemplating a stop at that tractor-pulling event. But how could I have foreseen this? I simply needed to reach the interstate. Perhaps once we were on a busy thoroughfare, he would desist. But deep within, I already knew it would not be that effortless. We finally accessed the highway, and I earnestly prayed that this was the point at which he would disengage. But no, he followed us directly onto the interstate, still closely adhering to my rear bumper. Initially, I decreased my speed, providing him every opportunity to overtake. He did not. I accelerated. He did so as well. The roadway was predominantly vacant, which exacerbated the situation. I had no discernible escape route. My friend, seated in the passenger seat, was incensed, prepared to exit the vehicle and physically confront this individual if it came to that. But I possessed no inclination to halt, not with my child present in the automobile. I simply needed to maintain forward momentum. Then, I conceived of an idea. I pressed firmly on my vehicle's horn for a sustained duration, ensuring that anyone in the immediate vicinity, if indeed there was anyone, would undoubtedly perceive the sound. The very instant I performed this action, the individual abruptly maneuvered his vehicle onto the shoulder and extinguished his headlamps. That action sent a profound chill through me. What kind of individual does that? I did not squander time attempting to ascertain the reason. I forcefully pressed my foot down on the accelerator, resolutely determined to establish as much distance between us as feasible. After approximately 15 minutes of silence, I commenced to relax somewhat. Perhaps he had capitulated. Perhaps it truly was merely some local imbecile attempting to frighten us for amusement. We even began to engage in light laughter, discussing the sheer absurdity of the entire situation. But just when we believed the ordeal was concluded, headlamps suddenly illuminated directly adjacent to us. I very nearly screamed. The individual had been present the entire time, trailing us with his illumination deactivated so that we would not detect him. He had patiently waited, lurking in the obscurity, solely to execute this maneuver. I was no longer experiencing fear. I was incensed. He had been pursuing us for a duration of 1 hour. By this point, this was assuredly no jest. Far ahead, I discerned the rear lights of a large commercial truck. I understood what action I needed to take. I accelerated vigorously, striving to draw near, understanding that if I could just attain proximity to another vehicle, I would not feel so isolated out here. The individual must have realized my intention, because that is when he attempted a new tactic. He swerved abruptly at my vehicle's rear panel, as if attempting to force me off the roadway. My heart pounded intensely as I narrowly evaded him by mere inches. I was no longer engaging in frivolous pursuits. I propelled my vehicle faster, finally catching up to the commercial truck, adhering as closely as possible to its bumper, so there was no available space for the individual to cut me off. And then, something extraordinary transpired. The truck operator must have comprehended the unfolding situation, because out of nowhere he abruptly swerved forcefully into the left lane, thereby completely obstructing the individual's path, and then lightly applying his brakes just enough to reduce his speed. That was my opportune moment. I accelerated to maximum speed, swiftly passing both of them, establishing as much distance as possible between myself and that deranged individual. I did not cease my movement until I was nearly home. I guided my vehicle into a well-illuminated fueling station, and by some stroke of fortune, a law enforcement officer was present. My friend promptly exited the vehicle and recounted everything to him. The officer immediately requested additional assistance to locate the individual. We did not proceed directly home that night. I left my vehicle in a different parking area simply as a precaution, not wishing to risk him discovering my residential location. For weeks thereafter, I consistently glanced over my shoulder, reacting with a start at the sight of any vehicle that remotely resembled his. And here is the element that continues to elicit shivers within me. This entire incident occurred in a town that serves as the location for one of the largest mental health institutions in the Midwest region. Every so often, I consult news reports simply to ascertain if there were any accounts of individuals having escaped around that particular period. I have never discovered any such information, but the mere thought that he could have been someone originating from that facility, that is the kind of contemplation that prevents one from achieving restful slumber at night.